Ciarán, welcome to Nodes and Ways.
Yeah, thank you, Austin. It's nice to talk to you.
For anybody who doesn't know, Ciarán is a mapper in Ireland and on the board of OpenStreetMap Ireland. And he's graciously agreed to talk to me today about the state of the map in Ireland and some projects that they have going on. So Ciarán, can you tell me about yourself and how you got into OpenStreetMap?
Yeah, sure thing, Austin. Well, my username is DeBigC. It's DEBIGC. And there's a kind of a long story, which I won't tell right now about how I got that nickname. But it was given to me rather than I chose it. And so, yeah, I've been mapping since about 2014. And I think I dabbled in OpenStreetMap back in 2009, 2010, but I couldn't remember my account for a couple of years. But 2014, I got involved as a volunteer in a project in Lesotho in Africa. And it required me to, I suppose, map a whole lot more and start mapping in Africa, whereas I just added a couple of nodes and ways in Ireland, appropriate for your podcast name. I really upped my levels of contribution to get involved in Lesotho that didn't have very much mapped in it at all. So, yeah, that's really how I got going in it. And then I guess I started to meet and know and interact with a lot of the OpenStreetMap in Ireland community. And yeah, from there, I just kind of got sucked in and I can't seem to get out.
Wow, that's great. So I mentioned at the top that you were involved with OpenStreetMap Ireland on the board, but you guys just became a local chapter, right? Can you tell me how that came about?
Yeah, that's correct. So we got that status given to us in Heidelberg at the SOTM conference. And yeah, so we basically went through the application process in 2019 with OSM Foundation. And yeah, we really wanted to put the community in Ireland on a kind of a firmer footing and maybe be a little bit more organized and have our meetups a little bit more regular and have a direction that we were all going in and have a kind of a forum and people to sustain and maintain kind of online platforms where we could talk to each other more. So, yeah, that's kind of why we did it. And that's what happened. Yeah, we got formally recognized as a chapter. And I guess the chapter, the thing to note about it was for the entire island of Ireland. So it didn't stop at the, I guess, legal jurisdictions between the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It's an all-Ireland big community effort, defying the limitations of where state boundaries fall.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That sounds like some very unique circumstances there. So has the foundation or the local chapter of the foundation been achieving what you hoped it would achieve?
Pretty much. I mean, we have had to learn our way into the work. We've been involved. The board has more or less existed now for 2 years. And I suppose in the middle of the COVID thing, our plan was to have our AGM in May, June, but may not happen quite on time. But that will mark kind of 2 years of the board existing and the company being registered as a not-for-profit entity. And the different things that we've done, set up tasks, and we've improved the web communication, and we've put ourselves up on new platforms where we can talk to each other, as I said, more frequently and more easily. So, yeah. We've largely established the OpenStreetMap in Ireland as a kind of a more organized entity. And yeah, we're pretty happy. You want to really ask the members how happy they are. But yeah, that's something that does have to get discussed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So tell me, what is the state of the map in Ireland? How are things going?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Ireland is, I suppose, we're in the country right beside where OpenStreetMap was born. And I guess if you look at our nodes, our node history, our first node came into existence, I think, in late 2006. So it's pretty early compared to a lot of the map around the world. And I know that the growth of OpenStreetMap was exponential. But we had our first node, in fact, was inside the north of Ireland. And we have expanded and expanded. I think in the early years, the members were very busy doing roadways and railways and big natural features like mountain peaks and forests and lakes and big things, kind of working more at the macro level. But I guess what's happened in the times in between, we started working at a more local level and in terms of what we were mapping. So one big project that the community had starting kind of after 2011, 2012 was called Townlands, and it actually has its own website called townlands.ie. And what we did there was we took the out of copyright townland boundaries for Ireland, the whole island, and we mapped them as boundaries as our lowest level of, I think it's 7, is it level 7 of sort of administrative geography? And we traced out of copyright maps, and a couple of the members were really, really involved in this. And there was, a few dozen people mapped intensively. I think it went on for about 2 or 3 years. And 64,000 little units of Ireland called townlands were finally finished. And occasionally now they need maintenance, and the members are discussing the stuff that they need to do about small shifts in a boundary or little improvements or different things like that. But it's largely a done deal. And why we kind of did that was geocoding, matching other data sets against things. Having these townland names was very, very handy. And also it reflects an awful lot of the history of Ireland. And I suppose Ireland, to step into the story of that history, Ireland was one of the very, very first mapped places in the world because of a conquest. And I won't go into all of that, but there was a significant amount of mapping out Ireland to grant it to people who had won, who had helped the English win a war, and then parceling that land out to the servitors and different things. So there's a long history of maps in Ireland. They're as old as the country, kind of thing.
Yeah. Sounds like mapping's in your DNA.
Might be.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of similarities in how maps are here in the United States as they are in England, because obviously we were at one time run by the British. So like our county system was, I believe, set up by the British. Is there any parallels there in Ireland?
Oh, completely. The whole outfit that does the official maps for Ireland, the Ordnance Survey of Ireland, were effectively the second Ordnance Survey company ever put into existence. So the British created their own one at home first, and then they created one for Ireland. So yeah, I think there's a long history and influence of how Ireland got mapped in different ways and by different efforts, right up until kind of 1920 when the state was created. So our influence, I guess, lasted just that bit longer than yours, but it's the same kind of stuff.
You're a lot closer by than us too.
Indeed.
Yeah. So great. So you told me about the Townstead project. Any other projects of note in the past or going on now?
Yeah, we have an mapping effort at the moment called Ireland Buildings. And we have a kind of a hashtag for that. So it goes hashtag OSM IRL _ buildings. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful, but it's buildings mapping. And we're not the only country. We kind of figured out that we didn't have a lot of our building detail complete, or even in some towns, we didn't really have it started. The towns were just kind of blank with roadways and a couple of buildings each in them, maybe the significant ones, the town hall, the big library, the hospital, the schools. But beyond that now, the residential buildings and the buildings that you might want to have mapped if you want to start doing addressing, those really weren't in place or weren't started or were all very partly done. So we
Mhm.
decided to go ahead and do that. And yeah, we've started in on that now. It started more or less last year as an organized effort, and we have a website for that. We'll talk a bit about it later, I think, or I hope,
Yeah,
which will be tasks.openstreetmap.ie. And it's basically there we're using version 2 of the AutoSM tool, which just makes a grid and lets you pick off your little square of Ireland and go in and map all its buildings and follow the instructions we've set down for tagging and different things like that.
that's great. When I first started in OpenStreetMap, I first started mapping my town. It was very similar. There was a couple of large buildings. The schools in the area were mapped, but that was it.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I started mapping in all the residential buildings, and I've seen since when I show people OpenStreetMap, the first thing they want to do is see where they live. They want to see their house or their apartment or wherever it is that they live. So adding those residential buildings, at least I know I feel it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you can still do with people and still have a high probability in Ireland anyway of not having it already mapped by someone else is getting them to map their own house. And however, that may change in the near future. Let's hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I love Tasking Manager too. I used the Tasking Manager for many of my own projects. Anytime I need to organize, Tasking Manager is usually in my thought process because just the way it organizes things and it makes you make sure that you don't miss anything in between the cracks, so to speak.
Sure, yeah. And avoiding the editing conflicts as well is very helpful because I guess we can have quite a high number, periodically, we can have a high number of people in Ireland mapping the same physical space. We certainly had a week of that last week where we had a kind of an event called Stay Home and Map Ireland. And I guess it was part of the COVID alert where we've all been staying home. And I know you've been
Mhm.
doing this too. So we just really wanted to give people something to do and to focus on. And we definitely had our grids in the different tasks we have in Ireland. I think we've 40. We had some of the grids lit up real bright with lots and lots of people on mapping. So there's a high risk if we didn't have something that parceled out space. There'd be a high risk of an editing conflict, which would be two editors at something in real time. So yeah, look, it's a tool that's designed for mass mobilization, and that's what Hot really designed it for. And it does that part of it. It does it pretty well. So yeah, so that was a good week, and yeah, it's definitely a good tool.
That's great. So the project, is it just adding buildings or are you correcting road geometry or what's involved?
Okay, so if you look in any of the tasks, we say, look, priority is we want the buildings added. But if you see something wrong, if you have time, can you add some extra detail or fix broken detail on roadways or on land uses? So we've given people license to go at their own pace and to really, really hit an area. But really, what we want is we want as many people as possible to do the buildings. We've made that decision, and I suppose the board made that decision, and the community seems to understand this very well, in
Hmm.
that we made the decision to go at buildings because when you have buildings, you can scale upwards easy if you're good at using GIS and stuff like that. You can scale upwards and start to create land uses out of the buildings if you had the tags kind of up to a reasonably healthy level of population. You could start to create land uses and at a more macro level, or you can launch into other projects, which would be to map historically significant buildings or to put addresses on if you want the practical side of things to be, somebody to be using the map end result or end user. Definitely buildings are a useful jumping off point to scale up and to scale down. And I suppose buildings are the kind of project that if you do them, they really do add detail to the map. They kind of show you, well, look, there's a clutch of buildings here somewhere. Where's the roadway that gets you to these buildings? There must be a roadway
Right.
or a pathway or something to get you to these buildings. So it kind of stimulates completeness of the map in things other than buildings because it shows where humans are. And I think buildings are very, very important, and maybe I'll say controversially for your listeners, maybe undervalued as a mapping theme. And so that's what we're hoping to do. So really our project is about getting all the buildings, but ultimately the objective is to complete our map as much as it can be completed.
Wow. That's great. I've definitely seen what you're describing as far as people say, an address point is enough because the building doesn't really affect routing. However, like you touched on, buildings definitely add a lot for different use cases. It just depends on what you want to use the map for.
Yeah,
Great.
exactly. So buildings would leave it as open as possible. Sure, like a point mapping is point mapping, but is somebody going to be happy that they know how to get into a point, that they know where to park outside it? You know what I'm saying? Like access point, egress point. One of the use cases in Ireland, one of the or two of the people in the community are very, very focused on disability, and they
Oh,
would
yeah.
like the map to be set out in such a way as somebody who has a wheelchair knows how to approach a building long before they ever use it, before they ever get there or ever saw it, this kind of scenario. So I guess we're doing stuff that would be really a really good investment in the future in terms of opening the map up for other kinds of people and other kinds of uses.
That's great. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but I'm sure because I'm not physically disabled myself, but I'm sure if you were in a wheelchair or if you had a cane, being prepared for something would make all the difference in the world right before you went out to a place.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, that's great. So if you do manage, I shouldn't say if, when you manage to map all the buildings in Ireland, let's be positive.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, what's next? What's after that?
Well, the beautiful answer to this is that I don't know. The community itself in Ireland will decide whether they all just do their own thing after that. It'll definitely be easier for them if they do that because buildings will supply that level of completeness. Or, we could decide in the future that there's a big community project again to do something else that we haven't mapped, like forests or boglands or peatlands or anything really. Or we could have projects existing in parallel, but buildings is our kind of number one thing at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Last year, we did a building import in the area where I lived, but the data was about 8 years old that we were working off of. So I picked an
Mm-hmm.
area that I went through and I said, I'm going to update all the new buildings. I'm going to do it by hand. So there's not a newer import data set for me to work with. So I'm just going to draw them out and I'm just going to update that and keep it rolling. And I'm going to try to refresh it on some kind of intervals. And I found in my area, there's been loads of change. I just live in an area that's expanded a lot in the last couple of years. Do you have any plans on keeping it up to date?
We haven't quite got there yet, but in Ireland it is reasonably easy to predict where new building work will happen and new buildings will result because we have very clear zoning controls that exist in the local government, in the planning offices in local government. So I guess we should know where those areas are because it's well published, and we should be out there kind of hitting those areas with our pillories or with our GPS tracks or whatever, just to start off. And then we should be looking, very next thing is we should be looking for buildings. And certainly what your experience there, Austin, is quite typical of I think how the map has evolved in OpenStreetMap. It's definitely a consideration of, what version, what satellite image are you using? What date does that relate to? And how likely is that to be complete? But the thing you have to do is you have to really, as a community, take the available imagery and do the best with it that you can, and then try and fill out the blanks later and innovate or go on the ground. I think going on the ground is ultimately the answer, but being a bit clever about, where you're going to go on the ground. The mapping community kind of knows parts of towns that are going to get developed for housing and for residential uses or other uses. So it's sort of, I suppose in Ireland, it's easy to know where to map. An example of that happened in Ireland in a place called Donabate, which is north of Dublin. And a new road was opened up, where the road is being opened up to allow a part of the town of Donabate to expand. And yeah, like I went up, I thought I'd be the first. I don't think I was the first, but I went up and down there with my mapillary and like drove around a good bit, then got out and walked around a bit. And then I went and uploaded my stuff to mapillary, and I saw there was two other people had done it as well. So, you know, it's like that. It's that we're driven by the need to, or the instinct that we have to keep as up to date as possible. So yeah, that's something I think that spontaneously happens in the OpenStreetMap community. It certainly does here. Yeah,
that's great. Three is my goal for completeness in Mapillary, anyways.
Yeah. You can definitely do a lot with 3 people having done Mapillary in a place. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I find that, you know, sometimes you go through something and maybe a car is parked in front of a sign or over something on the road and you miss it. Or maybe somebody came through in the spring and there's lots of trees with the leaves and you can't see through them, but then somebody comes through in the winter and you can see through them because all the leaves are gone out of the tree. So usually at least in my experience, if a street's been covered 3 times, I can count on that data pretty completely.
Yeah. So if people are mapping off like say just an Android phone or an iPhone, you're definitely going to have that limitation. But there are some of us, including myself, who use 3D cameras. So while we might still have the leaves of the trees in spring, or we might still have the tall car parked outside that obscures the view of a building sufficient to say whether it's a 1 or 2 story building or whatever it is you're looking for, right? While those are still possible, when you have the 3D cam, you've also got the image taken another bit back on your previous, depending on your interval. So you've also got another view, if you like, which may see around the obstacle. I think mapping in JOSM, certainly using the Mapillary widget, there's definitely different workarounds you can do. So you can go an image back or an image after, and sometimes you're able to catch it. And when you have a 3D camera, definitely a much better chance of that. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely a different experience. When you say a 3D camera, are you referring to a 360 camera, like a 360-degree camera?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I've got one as well. But I get a lot of funny looks driving around town with it.
Yeah, you do. For sure.
So Ciarán and I had a conversation earlier, and he mentioned something to me that I had no idea about, but I found super interesting, was that the idea that people who are of Irish descent in places like here in the United States or maybe even Canada are mapping homesteads in Ireland where their family came from. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So our community, I suppose we look at who's mapped lately. So we do a big extract of the database. So we sort of see the kind of top 10 mappers. And by the way, I'm not yet in the top 10. So this is like something to watch for or something to shoot for. But we can definitely see in the top 10 the people who we know and we've found and what have you. But there are definitely people who are from, like they have hotspots in the United States. So I don't think I should say their usernames right now, but they're there. And we're very glad that they're there. We just don't really interact much with them. And we noticed that when they map somewhere in Ireland, they map in a particular place, if you know what I mean, where they may have found they have I don't know, maybe an ancestral connection or something. And yeah, they definitely bring in they definitely add something to the map. I wouldn't say like they have any issue or we have any issue with the way they tag things. We just treat all of that like we treat all the tagging differences between ourselves. So we revert things or we change things if they're not really the way we want things tagged. But mainly the point is, and the point of significance is, that people are very connected to Ireland still, and that can be 2 and 3 and 4 generations away from actually having someone who lived in Ireland. So I guess, what we were touching on in our earlier conversation was there was the famine, and there was a lot of emigration from Ireland to the United States back in the last century and the previous century. And certainly, I think there's something like 35 million people in the United States today can definitely say they have an Irish ancestor. So it's quite a lot of you, have the Irish ancestor. The percentage, I think, is even a little bit higher in Canada. And they're definitely also in Australia and New Zealand, which were places that Irish people chose or were forced to emigrate to. And funny places like Argentina and South Africa. And, we have lots of connections all over the world. So when we were mapping earlier, Austin, you saw that we found a village on Achill Island, right? And I'm going to turn the interviewer tables on you, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what did you see when we got to that village on Achill Island?
A couple of things. So just to describe what he's talking about, there was a small island full of stone houses that had been abandoned at some point, presumably during the potato famine, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And 1 or 2 houses that were still there and obviously occupied, but you could really see the history that still remains there from people exiting the island.
Right. Yeah. So those people, like, just to pick one off, the very first interview you did was with Maggie Cawley. Like, Maggie Cawley's people, she may not know it, but we can tell from her name that they left here at some point,
Yeah, sure.
So, it's everywhere. So we do have people coming back to map. And then we have a lot of people in Germany seem to like to map Ireland because it's like nostalgia of when their map was emptier, because we're not as advanced as Germany for sure. And the German community is large in size. It's the largest one. If you look at the stats page every day, the Pascal Nice, the guy who developed the OSM stats webpage.
Yeah.
So his page shows you that Germany seems to have the biggest number of people every 24 hours mapping. And they we get some spillover from there to Ireland. And they definitely map well, and they help us. And, so there's no kind of national qualifications on mapping Ireland. And our population is small, and we need some help with mapping. And we're very, very glad that we get that bit of help. So everyone's just a mapper, right? So it's always positive when we have contact with other mappers from other countries. We think so anyway.
That's great. One of the reasons why I found this so exciting, and I had never thought of it before, was when I first started mapping, I was mapping my town, like I said earlier, and it really deepened my connection to the place where I live. Because even though I've lived in the same town for the majority of my life, there's streets I've never been down. So I could see what's down those streets and really pay attention to it. But so I'm Scottish on both sides of my family. One side's very close and one side's very far back, but they're both Scottish. And I thought, well, that's such a great idea. I'm going to help with this project too, but I'm thinking about jumping over to Scotland, where my grandmother grew up, to map that place and see what it was like where she grew up, so I can get more of an idea of where I came from.
Right. So now there's a team developing, which is that mapping is a very personal thing. And it's personal to you, to what your interests are, and it's personal to your family and your history. So, yeah, sure, why not? That's a great thing. I'd really be a fan of more of that happening. And other things as well, Austin, are that I go on holidays or vacation to different places, and I always map that place. I always say, where was the hotel I was staying in? Is it mapped? Where was the place I went to eat? Is that mapped? Or where did I go on the Sun Lounger? Is that mapped? So It's kind of funny, but it's what OpenStreetMap is kind of driven by, is the personal view of things. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing. I think a lot of mappers do wherever we go.
Yeah, yeah.
So how can people help with your project? It sounds like it's a huge endeavor. How can we help?
Okay, so basically, at any stage, the tasks are there for people to look at. So I said it at the top there, which is tasks.openstreetmap.ie. So again, that's tasks.openstreetmap.ie. They can follow there's an Irish Twitter account, an official one for the board and the community, and it's osm.ie or osm_ie. And that will announce different things that we're doing. But people can come on at any time and they can kind of map alongside the resident mappers, and they're more than welcome to do that. And then what I'd say as well is, pick a county that, maybe you know something about or you heard something about before, but no one is going to check your passport, right? And see where, have you got an ancestor from anywhere? But that'd be just silly, right? But no, come on and engage with our community and map alongside them. Now, specifically, we are holding every kind of Wednesday. We hold a kind of hangout, and what I'll do is, if your listeners can hop on to the Twitter account for Ireland and follow it, it will announce every Wednesday what time we'll be mapping at. So, from the date that you publish this podcast, the following Wednesday, we will be there. So I think you're due to go out with this one on, is it Sunday the 10th or Monday the 11th?
Yeah,
so we would be there
around.
the following. Yeah, we would be there on Wednesday the 13th and Wednesday the 20th if anyone wants to join in. So maybe we'll say Wednesday the 13th. We'll look out for our American and Canadian and Mexican and Argentinian and South African and Australian and New Zealand cousins coming back to say hello. How's that?
That's great. That's awesome. And just for everybody listening, I'll definitely include links in the show notes so that you can follow the Twitter and look at the official project as well.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
That's great.
So, thank you, Austin. That's really kind of you. And I wish you happy mapping.
Happy mapping.